Hello, my name is Teresa Chickwitz, and I'm honored to be here representing Betrayal Project USA. We are a victim-led organization dedicated to exposing institutional betrayal, honoring those we've lost, and pursuing justice for crimes committed under the guise of public health and COVID-19. You can learn more about our work, view victim stories, submit your story, and get involved by visiting our website at betrayalprojectusa.org. Again, betrayalprojectusa.org. You can also follow us on Rumble, BitChute, and X by searching Betrayal Project USA or going to our website and linking to our social media. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Gail and Brad Seiler, who were survivors after escaping Medical City Plano that were administering deadly hospital protocols in the state of Texas. Gail, Brad, thank you for being here and for your courage for sharing your story publicly. Let's start from the beginning. If you could tell me a little bit about your life before you got sick and how did you guys kind of come into the scenario?
Yeah, so we had been in the medical freedom fight, or we had been involved in politics. I had been involved in politics for a long time, and Huckleberry, Brad here, I kind of brought him into the whole medical freedom and political arena, kicking and screaming. He would always say that election years were my Super Bowl, because I would get involved in everything. But but for the most part, we were involved in fighting mandates. I don't believe in any mandates. It implies that the government has a right to tell you what to inject into your children or yourself, and so we'd always been involved in that. Brad had been he had been in the military, and he was
nuclear biological chemical warfare officer.
Yeah. And so that's a mouthful. And so I let him say it. But, he served his country. He's very patriotic. And he also, in his civilian life, had been a registered nurse. You want to talk about what kind of nurse you were?
Yeah, so I was a registered nurse working in an emergency room or critical care. Falls under the critical care field, but in an emergency room in a major Dallas hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he had that medical training. But other than that, we were your typical, basically just your typical parents, grandparents, just basically someone's Nana and Pop-Up, spending time with family. And when COVID hit, nothing made sense. And I can remember Brad saying to me, "This is not how viruses act." His experience told him and I mentioned his experience because it wasn't founded on just things that he heard in the news. It was founded on his personal and professional experience. He knew it was a biological weapon, that COVID itself was a biological weapon.
How did you come to know that? Were you guys following up on what was going on in the world, or how did you come to know that, other than your personal experience? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a field artillery officer, one of my hats that I wore was a nuclear biological chemical warfare officer, and was acquainted with throughout history, all the ways that man has used nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons to hurt each other, to maim and kill. And using my nursing experience and my pathophysiology of how certain disease processes work and what happens to the body, I quickly realized that what they were describing as a viral infection was not acting normally like a viral infection. And so when I heard what they were saying and how it was not acting like a normal virus, I knew it was man-made, that it wasn't natural. nature doesn't create viruses and to act the way that this one did. So I knew that man had been tinkering with it, because when I became a nurse, there was a lot of talk about DNA and genetics and changing things. And Dolly the sheep. I don't know if people remember Dolly the sheep, but China actually cloned Dolly the sheep, even though the United States had regulations against cloning and things like that. China had actually cloned a sheep. So we had many discussions in school around genetics and the morality and the ethical purpose of it. So that's basically using those two things. I deduced that this was not a natural virus. The nature rules everything, and God created nature, and it works a certain way. And when man starts tinkering with it, then you start to get these dangerous.
So when you
pathogens.
guys were when you were hearing that of the deaths that the news was portraying, did you start to align with the other folks that did you find anybody else with the same thought, or did you have a plan?
Oh, yeah.
You had a plan? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we had a plan. So we were aligned with a lot of like a lot of the medical freedom groups. We had been to rallies and things with vaccine, Texans for Vaccine Choice, and different PACs, and worked on different legislation. We were very involved in that, and when the mandates hit, we plunged into it. I mean, because the company I used to work for had a mandate, and we had to fight it, and we successfully fought the mandate. We had sought help from the attorney that helped us in the hospital. We had sought his help. We'd met him at some of the rallies, and so there were a lot of protests and things in the Dallas area where we are, at the hospitals and all of that. And so, at Love Field, when Southwest Airlines was putting in a mandate, it was very hot. The topic was very hot. But for 10 years, my first stint with medical freedom was around psychotropic drugs with kids back in 2005. The abuse of psychotropic drugs and electroshock therapy for kids, and they were really targeting foster kids. That was my first time I really kind of delved into the world of medical freedom, and I realized something was very, very wrong. And so
your mistrust of doctors really started even before COVID began.
I always say, like, the fact that I never trusted doctors. Huckleberry would get after me all the time, like, you don't regularly go to the doctor. I only go if my toe is falling off or something, and even then, like I have to be really injured or sick to go to a doctor. And he'd be like, well, you don't have like a regular consistent care. And so we would, because he was a nurse, and so to him, you go to the doctor regularly, you go for checkups, to me, I didn't trust doctors, so I'd be like, checkup, I could do a checkup, like, I don't know. I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but now I haven't been to a doctor since they tried to kill me. So, but yeah, so before we were fighting it. We had just gone to a symposium, a COVID symposium in September of 2021, because we started following Dr. Richard Bartlett right away with the budesonide.
Okay.
And that was,
people were beating this. You knew that back then, even though it was a man-made thing, you knew how you can beat it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wouldn't even go someplace that required a mask. I wore a mask one time, and that was when the nail salons opened back up after 2.5 or 3 weeks or whatever. I used to love to get my nails and my feet done, and I put on a mask just for that, and I felt so awful about it. I haven't had my nails and feet done in 4 years. I said, I put a mask on for vanity's sake. And I told my husband when I got back, I would, and he cheered it because of the budget. No, but I was like, I will never, I wanted it so bad. I was willing to put a mask on my face when it didn't make sense. Never again. And so our motto had always been, if they can make you wear a mask for the things that you want, what will they be able to make you do for the things that you need, like food and shelter and things like that. And so we were very much not about masking, and Huckleberry knew it didn't do any good. And if you're, because he understands why you would wear a mask and when you wouldn't, and what it does, and how it medically didn't make sense. And so we were very involved. And then we went to this COVID symposium. I think it was Dr. Artis was speaking there, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Bartlett, and a whole skew of people. It was similar to the Clay Clark event. And so we learned a lot, and we got some contacts, and I remember Dr. Artis, if anybody watches Dr. Artis, the way he would talk about the medications that you need to be careful of, he gave them names that you can remember, right? Like Illumiant, which is baricitinib, to stay away from, right? And he would be like, just think of a light, Illumiant, think of remdesivir as run death is near, Paxlovid. Like he went through the host of all of these drugs, tocilizumab, Tosi, right? Just remember Tosi, Actemra. It's also, he would tell us all of these alternative names, Veklury, that for remdesivir. And so ironically, that was one of the best things. My memory kicked in when every time they would bring a new drug to me, I would say, okay, like I was like, just like it, and I would remember the cute name he gave it, or the the run death is near or whatever. And that's really when that's the first I knew that they were killing people in the hospital. I didn't know how. And I didn't think it was necessarily happening in Texas. Like I thought, well, it's happening in Michigan, it's happening in New Jersey, New York, California, Washington, but surely it's not happening in Texas because we're a red state. Like, well, that wouldn't. We're in the reddest city of the reddest county of the reddest state, right? Like
your hospitals are working fine. Yeah, they're not.
Yeah, my perception was like maybe there's a hospital or two in the cities, in the big cities, but not in red country. And we were wrong. We were dead wrong. And so
this was December 2021, or at the end of November, December, right? So the numbers were really starting to climb. And so was your family also were they aware of everything that you knew about COVID and that there was a way to beat this? Did they know that?
I think a lot. I think for the most part they were. There were some that were not. It was kind of split like everybody's. We had family members that were getting the shot and getting the booster already, and just shot. They were so afraid that they were willing to take something that was so experimental and dangerous. And we were not, like Brad always got a flu shot every year, and he would be like, "Why aren't you getting a flu shot?" Well, I work from home. I worked from home, so I was like, I worked from home for 10 years, way before COVID. So I'm like, I don't, need it. And so he would get a flu shot pretty faithfully and wasn't like anti-shot, but he was anti this shot. He was anti this shot. Nothing made sense. It was out too quick. The first lady who took it, America watched her faint at the podium, right? Like if that wasn't a hint, right? So there was a lot of politics around the shot, like in it was like when it was before the shot was out, Democrats were like, don't take the shot because it's like like Trump was in a lab or something with a Bunsen burner and a beaker speakers, making it himself. But it was too fast. And then once the Biden administration took over, it was push, 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 push. And you started to see people getting sick. You started to see people dying. It was very evident.
What, Brad, what was your indication? What was the primary reason you didn't want to take the shot?
So historically, vaccinations, it usually, specifically the flu, it takes 3 years to develop a vaccine. And for the flu, it's two strains of viruses, and they take an educated guess as to which strain will be prevalent 3 years down the road, and then they start manufacturing these vaccines. Well, when the science said that they were making this vaccine within months, I knew something was not right, because vaccines take a long time and a lot of planning to develop. So either they were lying to us about the disease and they'd been working on the vaccine for a while, or this wasn't your everyday vaccine. And I couldn't come up with a timeline for its production that made sense. And so if I don't understand it, I'm not going to take it. And if it's a virus, you can't vaccinate for viruses. You just can't. And so because of the nature of the virus and how quickly it mutates under normal circumstances, nature. And so it just didn't make any sense to snap and take something that more than likely was not going to be effective by the time it got out anyway. So nothing made sense to me in the world of pathophysiology and medicine at that point.
And by the fall of 2021, so they had tried everything. They had tried scaring people into taking it. They tried incentives. They tried gift cards. They tried donuts. They couldn't get enough people to take it. And then came in August the jabs. Jab or job, right? You take the jab or you lose your job. And that was defeated in a lot of states. It was defeated, but it did move the needle, because a lot of people took it because they didn't want to lose their jobs. And that was the stick, that in and of itself told me something is very wrong, very, very wrong. And so we were even more vigilant than ever to learn about what was going on. We knew it was, and by then, people, it was pretty well known that it was man-made, that it did come from gain of function. Like they had already kind of admitted it, right? And Pfizer was going to court to suppress the data for 75 years, all of that stuff. And so there was also an indication, the shedding had become pretty well known, and I'm sensitive to the shedding. And so when but we had loved ones who took the shot, and we were not willing to not see our grandkids during the lockdown period, which we never obeyed. We were not willing to waste 1 minute of our life, short or not, without seeing our grandkids. Like, no government is going to keep me from my grandbabies. I'm just going to say that. Like, there is not a force of nature or government or entity or nobody, a grandmother and her grandbabies shall not be parted. And so, so was the same with our loved ones. If our loved ones took the shot and we knew what the potential was for the future, we certainly were not going to not see them. And so we had everybody over for Thanksgiving. We had a big Thanksgiving like we do. And I got sick after Thanksgiving. And I do believe 1,000,000% it was the shedding that got me sick. The vaccinated people that were here. I wouldn't have changed it for the world, because I love those people, and shedding or not, I will love them. They're probably going to be here for a shorter period of time, and I don't not spend time with them, right? Like double negative. But so I got sick, and and during that time, Biden had taken control of the monoclonal antibodies supply in Florida, throughout the nation, but in particularly in Florida and Texas, because they were having a lot of luck with Regeneron and stuff. And so it was in short supply. Huckleberry was taking care of me, and I was kind of in and out. I was trying to work, and I was trying to like just kind of get over it, right? But I was starting to get worse, and my breathing, I couldn't get ivermectin. I couldn't get the hydroxychloroquine. Nobody would fill it. We had to get it sent.
So your local doctors that you tried contacting them, there's no.
Yeah, no help, and all the doctors were overwhelmed. Like, we had a plan that we would get these things. We didn't know that we could have already had them in our possession ahead of time, and just been prepared. But we did have a little bit of ivermectin, but it was like 3 milligram pills, right? And so now we know it goes by weight, and so like you need to be taking 40 or 50 milligrams, not 3 milligrams. So it was essentially, it did no good. We couldn't even really get like antibiotics or budesonide, none of that. And so I went to I started to feel worse and worse, and Huckleberry was checking my pulse ox. He was checking my and we made a decision to go to a clinic that had the monoclonal antibodies. So I made an appointment. We went in for them, and they said, we can't give it to you. Your oxygen is under 90. It was like 89 or 88 at the time. Like, it's probably that, like just me taking a walk, right? So but it was, and then they put the oxygen on, and they said, you need to go to an emergency room. And I said, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And Huckleberry came back to pay. They wouldn't let him stay in there, so he had to come back. He was kind of pissed off about the way that it went, and I totally understand. But we went back home, and eventually he said, my oxygen dropped to 77 on the 3rd of December. My oxygen dropped to 77.
So maybe Huckleberry at this point, he's starting to think, man, that's too low. We need to get some additional oxygen.
That's exactly what
Yeah. So this was the winter of death that faux President Biden called for. He called for a winter of death of the unvaccinated. That's when all this started. And yeah, I had a pulse oximeter at home, being a registered nurse. And one of the most important things about people's breathing and oxygen is the first place it shows up is in the brain. And so you see altered mental status in people that aren't getting enough oxygen. And then that's the first place that gets affected. The second place is the heart. So I was monitoring her mental status with this pulse oximeter. And, when it was down in the 80s, I was concerned. And we had gotten the frontline doctor protocol from the FLCCC.
So you knew how to get ivermectin and some of these other things that they were giving, azithromycin. There's a lot of things they were giving. You knew that you could get this, but
we had contacted Stella Emanuel, and they had sent medications, but none of the carriers were delivering anything in any kind of timely manner, and she just kept the pulse ox, just her percentage saturation just kept going down, and I would monitor her mental status, and I wasn't really concerned, but we talked about the fact that if because I was sick at the same time as well, she was getting worse faster than I was. and we had talked about Colonel Allen West and his wife had gone to the hospital that's just a couple blocks away from us and had received the frontline doctor protocol. And he had left the hospital that day, and I think his wife wound up staying over a night or something. But they left immediately with the protocol that we wanted. So we decided that we would go to this hospital and request this specific protocol. And I felt pretty comfortable with that because she wasn't in an emergent situation. Yes, her pulse oximeter was low, which concerned me, but I'm not that concerned about it just because I understand how the piece of equipment works and it can give false readings. So that's why I always went by the mental status of a patient rather than what their piece of equipment told me. It's purely for monitoring. It's not a diagnostic tool. So we had decided that we were going to go to Medical City Plano. And when it got down below 80, I was afraid that it was going to be too difficult for me to get her to the hospital if it went down any further. So I wanted to be a little proactive while she could still walk and get her to the hospital.
Sure. What did you guys think that you were going to experience at the hospital? What do you think?
I had very low expectations, but I have to say, when we got there, there were indications it wasn't the best of care, right? Like, we won't go into all of that because but we couldn't find a wheelchair. I was running out of breath.
I can tell you as a former healthcare professional, I had very high expectations. I was just going to take her to the hospital. She was going to get the protocol and supplemental oxygen, and then we were going to come home. And I had very high expectations of my peers, and especially emergency room, that they would handle the situation. That they're used to handling all kinds of emergencies all day long, day in and day out. So I was confident that the emergency room was going to be able to take care of it. I wasn't very confident in the hospital, just because I understood what happens in hospitals. So, but I figured she would just go to the emergency room. We'd get the protocol. She'd get some supplemental oxygen, and then she'd get discharged home.
Wow. In the emergency room, I was probably in the waiting room for about an hour, even though he had put in, when he filled out my form, he put all the indicators that mean they should take somebody back right away. But, we were.
I used the language that an emergency room nurse would understand when they look at a triage sheet. It's called a triage sheet. And there's certain things that when you look at a triage sheet, there's things that you look for that would tell you whether a patient was emergent. And I used all those key words in the description because that's what she was experiencing. And so when I turned that sheet in, I expected that she would be called back fairly quickly. Even though the emergency room was busy, they had, your typical emergency room patients in there, broken arms, kids with sniffles and all kinds of things. But she was somebody that had a critical O2 saturation because it was considered critical. She was experiencing shortness of breath. She was having some chest issues. And I just thought that she would be triaged above, broken arms and dislocated elbows. But we sat there for over an hour before anybody ever called her.
Wow. And so then they called me back, and they said they would he handed them the protocol that we wanted, and they said that they do that protocol, and he put a copy of it in my bag. And then they told him he had to leave. It was policy that he had to leave. He couldn't stay.
Even though I had COVID as well, they told me to leave.
Right. So he had to leave.
Not even for 2 hours. They wouldn't even let you stay.
We just sat together in in the wait, like they didn't even bring me in. Like, I sat in the waiting room for an hour, and we had driven in a car together and slept in the same bed. But no, he had to leave, and they don't want witnesses. That's what we ascertained later. But
sorry to interrupt, but to Brad, your point was that COVID affects your mind, right, with the low oxygen. So it's so critical that you would have been allowed with her. But they didn't allow you to stay to make these informed decisions. Wow.
In the recent history of healthcare, patient advocates, specifically patient members, were welcomed to be with the family member, with the patient, because of the acknowledged need for their assistance, especially in an emergent care environment. It was very interesting that they wouldn't allow a patient advocate.
Right.
But that's coming from a nurse who was trained that in a healthcare setting, the registered nurse is the primary advocate for the patient in the absence of family or a legal advocate. That's the role of the nurse, is to advocate for the patient. So At that point, I wasn't concerned, because I was expecting the nurses to advocate for my wife, and they had acknowledged the protocol, and they had acknowledged that they did it. So there were no red flags at that point. It was highly unusual by far, but it wasn't. I didn't really have any concerns at that point.
Right. And to be clear, like once he left, in hindsight, there's red flags, but I didn't know at the time that they were red flags, right? Mm-hmm. Because we had a plan, and we knew about the drugs, but we didn't know about all of the other things that they do, right? And so the main thing that I wasn't aware of is watching the escalation of my oxygen. And so during the time I was in the emergency room about 36 hours, right? So about 36 hours of emergency room. And the reason was because they don't open up an ICU unless they have enough patients, 5 or more patients, to go up into the ICU, because it's not financially prudent for them, right? They got to bring in a team and all of that. So in that 36 hours, they were upping my oxygen. When they up your oxygen, just so people understand this, so they're upping my oxygen. They're not letting me get up to go to the bathroom. Not even on a potty. They're using this Purewick thing where all these weird things. And so they're upping my oxygen, and I'm getting weaker, and I'm not moving. Now I've been on a gurney for 36 hours and not moving around. And so
and no food
and no
water.
So it's been 36
just oxygen.
So, okay. So you got oxygen. At this point, you had a lot of trust, though, for who you were working, like the nurses around you. You didn't have any reason right at that moment to be suspicious of their activity.
Yeah, they weren't cruel. They weren't anything like that. And so then after 36 hours, I go up to the ER or the ICU. They bring me up to the ICU unit. As they're pulling me in, they pulled the bed up, the gurney up to, and I could see in the window, because all the windows are open to the rooms, so everybody can see it. And I could see that the person in the room next to me was on a vent, and there was somebody sitting there holding their hand, crying.
Oh my gosh.
And it did turn out that was a family member saying goodbye, because that person was going to die that day or within hours. And so they pull me forward. They pull me back, backwards into the room, and they were like, okay, like 6 of them were just like, okay. So I'm like, you want me to just like dive into the bed? And they're like, could you? I'm like literally, they said that. So I'm like, all right. So I got this.
And this is somebody who is dying from a deadly disease.
I mean, I rolled into the bed, but I was in pain. I was in pain. But so they get me, so I'm in this bed, and I'm in this it was a 0 or negative chamber room, but they didn't have it on or whatever. But so I'm in the room for quite some time before I meet, and I want to go through before I tell you, I just want people to understand the players, and then I'll tell you how they each play it. So the first doctor I meet is Dr. Ganquach. Dr. Ganquach. He is what they call a hospitalist. This term of, it's basically somebody who's incompetent, who is in charge of the patients on the ICU or the floor or whatever. He's the hospitalist. Doesn't know anything. He comes into my room and introduces himself.
And he's trained as a gastroenterologist. That's his training.
If he even is a doctor.
Not as a critical care doctor.
But so he comes in and he asks me, the only question he asks me is, he asks me the basic questions, right? Do you know how old you are, where you are, the orientation questions. And he asked me if I was vaccinated. And when I said no, this man patted me on the hand and said, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Seiler, you're going to die."
Oh my gosh.
That was his words to me. That was the first indication that I was like, wow, they're going to kill me. And I remembered Dr. Bartlett saying, "You can fire your doctor. You can fire your doctor." And so I said, "You're fired, doc. I need somebody who knows what they're doing. I didn't come here to die." And I'm like, I got to call my husband. I called Brad. I said, this crazy doctor says I'm going to die.
So at this point, you have a community. Brad can't get in the hospital. You haven't had water for 36 hours, you mentioned. So
by this time it's longer, because it was probably a good 6 hours or so before I met Dr. Quach from that.
And I'm at home not feeling very well at all.
Yeah.
And I was by myself. There was nobody here with me except for me. And I was trying to nurse myself back to health, but I was barely able to get out of my chair, let alone, do anything else. So
and you sent her with the protocol. You sent her with the protocol as well. So you felt she was in pretty good hands at this point.
And I thought that I could take care of myself at home. I could do the things that I needed to do. I could get water. I could make soup if I needed to, Jello. I could get to the bathroom, but I was miserable doing it. But I was taking care of myself.
So I called him, and this whole time there was this heavyset, snotty. I think she was like a physician's assistant or registered nurse or something, that had just put a catheter in me, because she told me that was my only option. I was not allowed to get, and they didn't want to have to restrain me. So
now there's a commode in the emergency room. It's right there in the room. So she could have gone to the bathroom.
Well, this is in the ICU, but there is a bathroom in the ICU.
There's a bathroom in the room in the ICU.
And there's commodes. And so she's standing behind him, nodding at everything he says, basically kissing his butt. And I call Brad, and I'm like, "Brad, this crazy doctor says I'm going to die." And he's like, "That doesn't make any sense. You're not even there, but a day and a half."
So here from my end, they had her on high flow oxygen and a mask. So she's trying to talk to me on the phone. She's holding the phone. She's trying to talk to me. It sounds like, and I'm like, okay, I can't understand what you're saying. And then the doctor would stand across the room, and he would yell across the room, and I couldn't understand what he was yelling across the room, because this mask is blowing this oxygen. And so I told her, because her voice sounded strong, I just couldn't understand the garble. So I would ask her to take her mask off. And when she would lift the mask, her voice was strong. And so that's the only thing I could go by, was the sound of her voice. Because if you're adequately moving air, you can, the tone of your voice will vary. If you're gasping for air, it'll be a whisper. If you're getting plenty of oxygenation and you try to speak louder, you'll speak louder. So when she took the mask off, I could understand her. When she put the mask back on, it sounded like nothing I could understand, even with the doctor across the room yelling things.
And so Dr. Gang Quach immediately started to try to gaslight both of us and said, because Brad pushed back and he said, her voice is strong. She doesn't, her voice is strong. She's not going to. And he said, the only thing that will save her is remdesivir and a ventilator. And he was like, she doesn't need a ventilator. Her voice is strong. She does not need a ventilator. And he said, are you a medical professional? And Brad said, as a matter of fact, I am. And he was like, oh, but he said she doesn't need a ventilator, no vent, no remdesivir. And we said, we want the frontline doctor protocol. And he said, I've tried those drugs for 2 years and all my patients died. And I said, well, then it's you're the problem, because everybody else who tried it, they lived. And I knew he was gaslighting me. And I knew,
and in the medical profession, there's a thing called first do no harm, and we can argue about that all day long. But typically, doctors have the intellectual ability to notice when something's not working, and so they can switch gears and they can try something else. This doctor was telling us that he only had certain things that he could do. And if he tried to do anything other than those certain things, that the quote unquote administration would override his order. Well, never in the history of working in a hospital or being a doctor has a hospital administrator had a license to practice medicine and override doctors' orders. That's why they hire doctors, is so that they can assess the patients and order the things that need to be done. And that didn't make any sense to me. Why is an administrator going to override a doctor's order?
Yeah.
And then then he'd say, oh, well, the pharmacist is going to override the order. And when in the history of ever in healthcare do pharmacists override doctors' orders, valid doctors' orders? A pharmacist can question an order, but never are they allowed to change an order or not fill an order, because they can lose their license for that. So everything that this person that has MD behind his name, nothing that he was saying from a healthcare perspective made any sense. He was talking about putting her on ECMO, which is heart bypass, and all these crazy things that are the most extreme thing in the world.
He didn't tell you about let's just say he didn't inform you about, what happens to people. Let's just say you mentioned remdesivir. He didn't.
There was zero informed consent.
Yeah, there was zero informed consent.
This doctor just was I think he was just making stuff up.
He really was.
None of it made sense, and there was no informed consent. And I knew right away when he was unable, as a doctor, who it's his responsibility to provide informed consent. When he could not provide informed consent, that's really the first clue that I had that something was very wrong.
And he's not the only one. And that first day I was like, I knew I was being gaslit by multiple doctors. Here's another doctor Kara Stout. You can see where she stands on the shots. That's her Facebook picture. You can tell where she stands. She also was like, we only follow the science, and ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine is, not FDA approved, all of these things. And I would say, no, you're not telling me the truth, because I know better. And I asked her, I said, have you heard of the frontline doctors? She said, never heard of them. I said, the frontline doctor treat. She's like, I've never heard of them. I said, well, then I'm more informed about how to treat COVID than you are, because they've been at this for 2 years now. And if you don't even know you can disagree with them, but if you're telling me you don't even know who they are, you're living under a rock. And so with all the gaslighting,
hard to just put a little pause there. And I'm observing that, she appears to be of Asian descent. And at this point in history, there's certain cities that they were mailing out ivermectin and a lot of these things, and they had no deaths or very low deaths. So for her not to know, that's very surprising. So sorry, go right ahead.
Right. Yes, exactly.
But that goes into, now we know that all the medical journals and everything are compromised. And when I was a nurse, we were being told to follow the science, but we still had the ability to think for ourselves.
Right.
And the fact that they were just regurgitating what they were told to say, and not that they were free thinking, thinking outside the box. That was another clue.
Right. And then, and so, I told them, I said, I didn't trust myself with them gas. If you hear you're going to die 10 times a day, you might agree to anything. And so at that point I said, I'm not going to make any decisions, even if it's about an aspirin or Tylenol. We have to get a hold of my husband. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to agree to anything or give consent for anything without having my husband on the phone. And over the course of the days, he would come in, or a doctor would come in, and I would say, I have to call my husband. Like they wanted to push me on things. But then after a while they were like, okay, we have to call the husband. She has to call the husband, or I wouldn't even talk to them because I couldn't get out. They couldn't get in. Him and Brad and my daughter, Angela, had both tried to come in to see me and tried to bring me things and see me even through the window. And it was pretty harsh. But the third person I want to introduce, these three people in particular that I'm showing you, they are so intricate in our story. The third one is William Fripp. He was the floor nurse for the last 7 days, I believe, at least the last week. He was the floor nurse in the daytime. He was the daytime floor nurse for most of my visit.
Which means he supervised other nurses.
Yeah, all the nurses, and he was in charge of that floor. This man is so arrogant in the way that he gaslights and allows abuse. You're going to hear about the abuse, but this guy, remember his face, right? Like, because he is integral in the story. So getting back to Dr. Quach, the first thing Dr. Quach did was when he told me I was going to die, I said to him, you gave me a terminal diagnosis, so I want the right to try ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide, and I want my right to have my priest come in and do last rites and give me last rites. And he said,
"That's reasonable. That's something everybody should have."
Yes. Right? So he said no. He said no. And so I'm still without water. I'm still without food. No hygiene. No care. They're pretty much taking care of me like I'm an animal, right? I had this suction thing. They would knock it on the floor and they would just hand it back to me, but I had to use it because if I didn't suction myself, I would have choked. I would have died. They're upping my oxygen. I'm on a BiPAP now, so it's hot air. I'm getting this film in my mouth already, and it's only a couple days.
Blood, right, comes with it with this mask, right?
Blood, bloody nose.
There's an issue with oxygen, especially at high volumes. Is oxygen sucks moisture out of anything, and so you have to have moisture. Especially to help oxygen work. If oxygen's having to fight in a mucous membrane that is dry, it can't do its job. And so they were putting her on this high flow, high percentage oxygen, and all it was doing was sucking the fluid out of her.
Right. And you can see how I'm like, this is the day before Huckleberry rescued me, but you can see, or no, this was actually a few days because the nurse had put me on a rebreather. So this was like the last day I had this BiPAP on, and a nurse had literally told me I'm going to take you off the BiPAP and put you back down on the rebreather. Don't worry about he monitored me every 15 minutes and told me to ignore the numbers and just listen to my body. And that probably helped save my life, because this device, when you hear people talk about a BiPAP, this is what it is. This is it. And it blows hot. It's torture. You can see my teeth gritting there, trying to like.
A lot of
and
people have lung damage.
And a BiPAP
right?
blows air in and sucks air out.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's called bi, because it pushes air in and pulls
Right.
air out.
And you can't. You actually get starved for oxygen.
It's hard. It's hard to breathe over a BiPAP. You have to breathe with the BiPAP.
Yeah, you can't blow out the CO2, right? So you can see how I'm getting. But that's what it looks like. It's absolute torture. And when you hear people, I mean, I would unclip it from the side there and make the nurses, like when they weren't looking, I would lift up my mask. I think that really helped me too, because I just couldn't. But I would unclip it when they would come in, and I would tell them I need to blow my nose, because there was so much blood stuck. It creates all these blood clots, and that's why you can't breathe, right? So I would blow my nose, and they would get all nervous, but that's what it looks like. So when I asked him when I said I wanted my priest, this is what, if you see here, he said no. And then he came back a day later and said, if we took remdesivir, he would allow my priest in.
So he's trying to negotiate with you. He really wants to give you this remdesivir, it seems. Right. But he's trying to negotiate with you that if you do this, then I'll let you get a please. You know, this is ludicrous.
And we refused Actemra and remdesivir. He says we agreed to Actemra. We never did. We did agree to receive remdesivir, and then just to get my priest in. We were hoping Father could come that night and do last rites and the anointing of the sick and everything. But he had an emergency and he couldn't come until morning. So they did get one round of remdesivir in me, and it felt like fiberglass going through your veins. It felt like, I had texted my daughter. I said, it feels like poison to my heart. This isn't right. And so, but then my priest came and we said we did not want remdesivir. And he says he respected our decision, but he actually got mad because he already let the priest in. And so he was going to hold that until I was good and ready to take it. And he kept telling us, you'll die without remdesivir. You'll die without a vent, you know. And you see here, we kept saying that I was full code. But in plan of care discussed with patient, he told him multiple times, because after a while at one point, Dr. Quach asked my husband, he said, what do you want us to do when she codes, when she has a heart attack, when she codes? And I was like, what do you mean? I don't feel like I'm going to code. And he was like, Brad said, what do you mean when she codes? I want you to revive her.
So he's already instilling this idea of no hope into you. He's depleting you. So this is so important to know for anybody that's going through this. He's planning for your death.
Right. And the first step in that stripping hope from people is the isolation, because the isolation was imagine being in a place where nobody you love is allowed to come there, but everybody, it's like being a prisoner of war, where everybody that is around you hates you. They think you should be dead because you didn't take a shot. And so the people that you see day in and day out that come into your room and you're helpless, they believe that you do not have the right to be alive because you didn't take a shot. And that's what you're surrounded with, and that's your only connection. And they can end your life in an instant. I was very cautious about anything that they put in my IV. I had to see it. Every single thing I had to look at. So you see here, he basically bans my husband from the hospital, has them looking for him. But my husband told them that he wanted them to call him. He's 2 minutes away. And he wants, if I code, he wants to be called, and he will decide whether or not to intubate me. He will come there and examine me himself, right? And the doctor said, well, then if we resuscitate her, we have to intubate her. And he said, no, you don't. You can bag her. You can use an ambu bag and breathe for her. And that will give me enough time to get there. And so regardless of this, he makes me a do not resuscitate. Do you see that?
Whoa. So at no point you already identified that you want to be resuscitated. You mentioned you didn't want to be put on a ventilator, but somehow they put in your chart, do not resuscitate. How did that happen?
Do not resuscitate. And my daughter would call me and she'd say, Mom, they still have you as a do not resuscitate. And I would tell them, the medical professionals that you saw, right? The three that I, in particular, that I showed you, I would tell them I'm not a DNR, guys. And they would say, yes, you are. Yes, you are a DNR.
So here's an important thing people need to know. When a patient is a do not resuscitate, the doctor has to put in an order to make a patient do not resuscitate. And then that goes into the system. And so that anybody in the hospital can see, if they pull up the record, they can see that the patient is do not resuscitate. The doctor has notes that says that she's a full code. But the fact that they made her a DNR in the system, that's what everybody else in the hospital besides the doctor is going to treat her as a do not resuscitate. It doesn't do a doctor any good to put in the notes that it's a full code if the patient's medical chart says do not resuscitate. In the event there's an emergency and they have to call a code to that patient, they're going to go by what the system says, not what the doctor put in their notes.
Wow. So we even had an attorney go to the administration and try to get that changed, and they wouldn't change it.
They really just wanted to list you. They did not want to resuscitate you. It's almost as if they wanted to kill you.
That was part of the protocol. Part of the protocol was patients were do not resuscitate.
Right. They were made and
with no informed consent.
No informed consent and no choice. No discussion with the family. That, and we hear that a lot from people, right? Like no discussion whatsoever with the family. Just do not resuscitate. So yeah, and so no food, no water. So I finally got water after 7 days. And here's how I got water. A little patient care tech who was her first day. So they would bring me water with laxatives in it, right? And I would tell them, I can't drink that. I'll dehydrate. I haven't eaten or drinking. I didn't say it that clearly because I had my mask on, but
she hadn't eaten anything by mouth, so there's no reason for a laxative.
Right. So I said, but I would ask them, if I can, why can I not have just water with water in it? Like if I can drink water with laxatives in it, and they were like, no, you can't because the doctor said you're nothing by mouth. And I'd be like, yes, but you're trying to give me an entire glass of water with laxatives in it. Like it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense that they were doing. And so I accidentally, like I was reaching for my rosary when there was the glass of water with the laxatives on it, and it fell off the tray, and it was a cup, right, and it spilled. And when the patient care tech came in, she was like, "Oh, Miss Gail, your water spilled," and she started cleaning it up, and she's like, "Do you want me to get you some fresh water?" And I said, "Would you? And some ice? Would you get me some cups of ice? I would love that." And she comes back with these 2 big cups of ice and water, and a cup of water. And so, and she only could find like a cup this big, but I drank the water, and I was chewing on the ice, trying to break up the stuff that I had developed thrush by now, and my hair was all, and I was filthy. So but a nurse came in and said, and so, yes. And so that's what my hair looked like when they got me home. Right. And so a nurse came in and she said, "What are you doing? You're nothing by mouth." And I said, "Clearly not, because I'm drinking water." And she was like, "Oh, I'm going to go get you some Insure." And she went out to get me Insure. And when she came back, she said, "The doctor won't let you have that, but he said you can have ice from now on." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm a smart girl. I know how to turn ice into water."
Yeah.
Like it'll happen. I can figure that out. And so from day 7 onward, I at least had ice, which turns into water. If people don't know how, you let it melt and then you drink it.
So just real quick, one of the reasons why you wouldn't let a patient have water is they're going to go to surgery or they're going to be intubated, which is intubation is part of surgery. So this just plays into their philosophy that they're preparing to intubate her. They're going to keep her not eating and not drinking so that at a moment's notice, they can put a tube down her throat.
That's right. And so things were getting worse and worse and more desperate and more desperate. My daughter would bring me things. She was trying to advocate. But I'm just going to go backwards a little bit. I think it was the 4th or 5th day I was in there, or 3rd or 4th, actually. My daughter got into the Clay Clark event that was going on here locally. And we were talking about Dr. Bartlett. We would be like, Huckleberry here said to Dr. Quatch, "I'm going to get a hold of Dr. Bartlett for help." And he had said, when he had told me, Dr. Quatch told me, he said, "Dr. Bartlett will never help you. He only helps people who are in good condition. Nobody as bad as you. Nobody in as bad a condition as you are." And so I was very discouraged. And I said, "Yeah," I was thinking to myself, "We don't even know Dr. Bartlett. He would never help me." And 10 minutes later, and God, this is why like God is so big in our story. 10 minutes later, my daughter sends me a picture, and it's her with Dr. Bartlett.
Amazing.
And I'm like, "Why is she with Dr. Bartlett? Where is she?" Right. And so my sister had taken down his number at the thing that we had and gave it to my daughter as well. And so she had that. And so Brad and my daughter started working with Dr. Bartlett, and he said, "Don't ask for ivermectin. They're never going to give it to you. Push for the budesonide." And they did. And eventually I did get 1 milligram every 12 hours. It started off. It was supposed to be every 10 hours and then 6, but they don't give it on time. So it was every 12 hours. When I got 2 doses of budesonide, because people need to know it's not only an inhaled steroid, but it also has antiviral properties. So after I'd gotten 2 doses of the budesonide, Dr. Quatch said to me, "Oh my God, you're doing better." Like he was like, "You're doing better. I've never seen this before." And I thought he was seeing the light. I'm like, imagine if you gave it to me every 4 hours, like Dr. Bartlett wants, threw in some ivermectin, whatever. And he said no. And then they started missing my doses, switching it with albuterol and all that.
So you were able to just confirm that budesonide was working, and
It was working.
We do know out at that time that a lot of other doctors that did not lose a patient were using strictly budesonide, such as
they were, and vitamins. And my daughter asked for vitamin C, and they said there's a national shortage, so they only save it for the most critical patients. And she was like, "You told my mom she's going to die. Like that's about as critical as it gets, right?" She brought me lotion with, I knew ivermectin was in the lotion, but they wouldn't give me the lotion. It was way at the bottom. They wouldn't, they just stuff everything where you can't reach it, right? The only way I can't even held on to my phone was because I needed to pray. I needed it for my rosary and my prayers. And I made sure that they understood that I needed that for the prayers. And so it was getting worse and worse and worse. However, after my priest left, I had hope. And Huckleberry knew that was going to happen, that I was going to have hope. But at the very least, it was very important to you to get Father in. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, as a former registered nurse, critical care nurse, I understood that hope in a patient is extremely valuable when it comes to life versus death. And if you can give patients hope, then a lot of the times they have good outcomes. It's when you take hope away from a patient, or a patient loses hope, that they tend to decline. And so when the doctor gave her a terminal diagnosis, which that's what he did, was he gave her a terminal diagnosis. He called it COVID, but it wasn't terminal. I knew that if I couldn't get in there to my wife and advocate and be with her, then I had to get our priest in. And I reached out. At the time, I worked for the diocese, and I knew that priests were being trained to go into the hospitals. But there was a lot of pushback from the hospitals to allow priests in. And so I got a hold of our parish priest, and he told me, he said, I will go in and I will give her the sacraments, but you have to get me permission to be in there. And he said, you might have better luck if you go to the diocese. And I said, no, Father, I'm not going to go to the diocese. I'll get you in there. And because it was her soul that I was worried about, whether she lived or died, I was concerned about her soul and where her soul would go. And until I could get there to be with her, I wanted to make sure that spiritually she was prepared for anything that happened. And I knew that it would make her feel better, and it would certainly make me feel better as well. So that was the importance of having her spiritual well-being taken care of. Number one, to restore hope, and two, to take care of her soul.
Also adding to that, I think, is that, the soul and the body are so closely connected that I think, you mentioned that if you can help her soul, her body is going to respond in kind. So it's a double, not only is you're worried about the eternal life of the soul, but also the body will feed off of that as well. So
and any critical care doctor that has been in emergent situations understands the necessity of hope in an outcome. And they understand that there's only so much a physical human can do, that there comes a point in time where God takes over, and how important hope is. Doctors that don't deal with critical situations, emergent situations, tend to forget the importance of a patient's state of mind.
Yep.
That then leads to their state of being, their well-being, and their spiritual being. And so it's very important.
Mind, body, and soul, right? So that was very important. That was, Dr. Bartlett coming on and working with us was a God thing, and the priest getting in was a God thing, and you know what, God. So this is how kind He is. it was my favorite priest. My favorite priest in the whole world walked in that door, and I was like, and he from the get-go was like, don't take that death dart, don't take that quat shot. Like, he knew exactly what. So I felt so good when he left, and so then the fight was on, because then it's like, death, where's your sting, right? Like, I was, if I die, me and Jesus win. If I live, me and Jesus win, right? So it was like, that was, and the hospital, I'm telling you, was full of evil. I was seeing people die every day being taken past my window, because everything was open. There were no privacy curtains. They like to just look at you. They like to just peek in at all times. And so half the time it's winter, I wouldn't even have a blanket or a robe.
So completely nude is really.
So here's a key thing in healthcare is every patient requires assessment, an initial assessment, ongoing assessment. An assessment involves the 5 senses: look, listen, feel, touch, smell. Okay. If you don't do those things, you haven't performed an assessment. Technically, that's what it takes to do an assessment. None of these people, very few of these people ever touched her or did an assessment on her. They would write plenty in the medical record, but they never properly performed an assessment.
No.
So they would just leave the windows open all they did was look at her and the instruments, the equipment. That's all they paid attention to.
It's almost like you're an animal hooked up to these machines.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And one thing, how I described the way she was treated was like one of the beagles in Dr. Fauci's mosquito studies. Was they treated her just like a beagle. They had no compassion, no humanity. There was a couple people that actually performed their jobs, and they're to be commended. But for the most part, the hospital provided a very inhumane environment for these people, specifically my wife.
If people go and they watch that beagle, the news thing about the beagles and the experiments, and then look at the hospital deadly playbook on betrayalprojectusa.org, you'll see the same things used. They cut
the dog's vocal cords, so they
cut the
bark.
communication.
They cut her vocal cords so she couldn't speak.
They're cruel. They don't clean the dogs. They don't give them food and water. Like, you'll see so much. Like, when people would ask him what they did to his wife, he would send them that video. But I digress. So, but yeah, people need to go and revisit that episode. I think it was on OAN.
So your priest left. At this point, you're feeling better, and of course, Huckleberry's still sick at home. What happened then?
Total 12 days I was there. And there were nurses who were really horrible. There were nurses that were ineffective, and there were nurses that were pretty decent. And so I'm going to kind of take you guys up to the there was a nurse, Rhianna Franklin, who was an absolute beast. But before that nurse, there was a nurse. He came in. I don't know what his name was. He was a tall African American man, and he's the one that took me off the BiPAP onto the rebreather, and I adjusted to that rebreather. And the other things that he did was, like, he gave me a new suction, and he put some up there, and he said, they need to give you a new one every day. They need to replace it. So I put some up there, tell them it's there, make them do it. And he was very, and he would come in and he would say, and this is where hope comes in. He would say, you're going to make it. Like, when he would come in, he'd say, you're going to make it. You're going to make it. And like, he would speak life into that, like, you're going to make it. And so, so he was very kind. He was only on that one night. And when Dr. Quach saw I had adjusted to the rebreather and I was off that BiPAP, he tried everything he could to get me back on that BiPAP, and I wasn't going. There was no way I was going. And so, so then I had this night nurse 3 nights in a row. The first, the mean nurses, the nurses that hated you because you were vaccinated or whatever, they would give you these Lovenox shots so that you don't get blood clots or whatever. That's like a blood thinner. And they were giving me insulin. I didn't need it, but they would like jam the needle in, and I was all bruised up and bleeding half the time. And this one was particularly cruel, and she would like,
there's a specific technique to give anticoagulants. It's called a Z-track method of administering the shot. As far as I can tell, these nurses never did a Z-track.
No, because I had, what would you say, 25 bruises that were about this big.
Huge hematomas all over her body.
All over my body.
And if you do a Z-track, it traps the medication in a space that's deep enough that you don't get bruising. Yeah.
And so
nightmare. It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, and so this woman, there were several incidences. One, my oxygen, I could hear, how you can hear it whistle when it starts to come apart, and I grabbed it right before it came apart, and I wasn't getting oxygen. I called out. I was like, help me. I put on my light, and it took her a long time to get in there, but she came in, this Rihanna Franklin, and she smacked me. And she said, she plugged it back. She goes, I can't be coming in here all the time because you're unvaccinated and you have COVID. And I was like,
she assaulted her. That's called assault.
And she goes, and I was kind of like, what I said was, if your shot works, act like it. Why would I get something that I still have to be afraid of? So, but she was horrible. And then the second night, my alarm went off, and it said that my heart rate was 212, and nobody was coming. And so I checked myself. I was like, oh my gosh, they've done it. Like, I'm thinking they've made me have a heart attack. But then I was like, I don't feel like I'm having a heart attack. And then I was watching the clock, and I was like, oh my gosh, nobody's coming. They don't care if I'm having a heart attack. Right? I was like, they just want to come and find me dead. And so I thought, well, I wonder how long it will take her to come in here. Because the nurse in an ICU only has two patients, me and the room next to me, right? And so an hour went by, and I put on my light. It just to let them know I was still alive. And the patient care tech peeks her head in, and she's like, can I help you? I said, I don't think that's supposed to be doing that, the alarm. And so the nurse came in and flipped off some stuff, and she goes, oh, it's just a lead that came loose, and she plugged it back up. And I said, you didn't know that. You as a nurse didn't know it was a lead. You didn't know what was wrong. You were going to let me die. And then the third night she came on, it was on the 13th of December. And so I'm there 10 days. And I texted my daughter, and I said, I'm afraid of my night nurse. I think she's trying to kill me. And
this hospital that's supposed to be a safe haven for your family, for you, for a patient, has turned into this nightmare, something you're terrified.
I was scared. And I texted my daughter, and I said, I am afraid she is going to kill me. And my daughter was at a dance recital with my granddaughter at the time. When she got home, she called up the nurse's station, and she said, I didn't know her name. I didn't know her name at the time, because they cover it up. You can't see their names. You know how it is. And so you don't know who's doing what to you. And then, and so she called, and she said, she finally got a hold of the nurse's station, and Rihanna Franklin answered. And she said, my daughter said, my mom wants to give kudos to some nurses, that were really good. Do you know who's taking care of her at night and during the day? And she said, well, I've been taking care of her the last 3 nights, and my name is Rihanna Franklin. And she's like, oh, can I speak to the floor nurse? This was the nighttime floor nurse, not William Fripp. And she said, my daughter said, I don't want that woman back in my mom's room one more time. Not one more time. My mom texted me and said she's afraid of her. She thinks she's going to kill her. My mom's afraid of nothing. She was like, my mom's never been afraid of anything in her life. And so when my mom says she's afraid, and the next thing you know, this big Polynesian guy, Simon, is coming in, and he's like, I'm going to be your nurse for the rest of the night. We've switched. And I was so relieved. I didn't know how, so anyways, so that happened. So then let's fast forward to the 14th. So the 14th, my last 2 days, and here you're going to hear some things. So the 14th, Huckleberry comes down he comes down to the hospital, and my daughter had contacted everybody I've ever helped get elected, and we know who will help and who we won't anymore. They made it very clear. But Senator Bob Hall was he was very much part of the medical freedom fight. He knew what was he tried very hard to stop what was going in the hospitals. So he was helping them, and a medical freedom lawyer. And so he had given Brad and my daughter a bill that they had passed. There were 2 bills. One that allows you in Texas the right to have a religious counselor in your room. And it can be anybody. It can be a priest, a pastor. My husband, who is the spiritual head of our household, should have been allowed under that bill to be with me. The second bill was a House bill, and it said that you cannot isolate a patient. You at least must let them have one person in. And you can only isolate them if you do the assessment that he was talking about, which they never did, and only for 5 days. Dr. Quach wrote an order every 5 days to exclude me from having any visitors. But it still didn't, he still was required to allow me to have one or the religious. So just to get that context. So Brad, armed with these bills that he's been given by the authors who wrote them, both our state representative, Matt Shaheen, who wrote the one bill, the House bill, and Senator Bob Hall, who wrote the Senate bill, the authors of these bills gave them to Brad and told him and my daughter, what the bills meant, right? So that's that. And so Brad goes down armed with those bills. And the first thing he did is he called me, and I'm going to play a recording. And my phone, for whatever reason, my voicemail picked up while I was talking to him. So you'll hear a little bit of silence in it, but we'll play this recording. This was him calling me and getting confirmation that I wanted him in the room because I had to do the bills. He had to have that. So listen.
It's bullshit. You know nothing. You know not a damn thing. You can find your way out of a paper bag. Hello, hey. Honey. Hey, honey.
Yeah.
Tell these people outside the door to let me in, that you want me in there with you.
I want you in here with me.
Huh?
I want you in here with me.
You want me in there with you?
Yes.
That's the law, and they're not letting me in. Do you have the number to Sheriff
Skinner?
To Sheriff Skinner?
I don't have it.
Okay, I'll call the sheriff's office, and I'll get a sheriff's deputy up here to let me in.
And so he did. So he hangs up.
At the beginning of that, I was talking to
the security guard.
The security guard.
So you're the husband, you're the head of the family, and you're armed with all these letters, and they still won't let you in your wife's room.
They still would not let me
They
in.
were just following the orders.
They were following the orders. And so now you're going to hear the 911 call. And this is on the 14th, the day before he, and then we'll tell you. So this is the 911 call. And you can hear the 911 call, the lady who's taking the 911 call doesn't really hear what he's saying about he wants the sheriff. He's concerned about my constitutional rights.
December 14, 2021, 11:02:42.
Plano 911.
Then why aren't you supporting the Constitution? Hello?
Hi, Plano 911. What's the address of the emergency?
Yes, it's Medical City Plano, Building B.
B as in boy?
B as in boy, outside of room 301. I would like to have the sheriff's office dispatched up here. They're not letting me into my wife's room. They haven't let me into my wife's room for the last 2 weeks, and that's a violation of state law.
Okay, what's the phone number you're calling me from?
214-274-3480.
Okay, and you said outside which room in Building B?
It's Building B, room 301.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting you some help on the way. Is the security there with you?
There is security here with me, and he won't let me in either.
Yeah, okay.
You realize they're in violation of the state law, right? State House Bill 221, Senator Bob Hall, and Representative Matt Shaheen. Hospitals have no right to allow no fewer than one person in with a patient. I would like to have the sheriff's office called and brought up here. Since they're trained in the Constitution and they're trained in the laws of Texas.
Are you going to let me ask some questions while my officer is being dispatched?
Are you listening to what I'm telling you?
I am listening about that, since I have questions while my officer is being dispatched to you. Okay?
Please.
Okay, and so what is your wife's name?
My wife's name is Gail, Gail.
And her last name?
Is the same as mine, Seiler, Seiler.
And why are they saying that you're not allowed in the room? What are they saying?
Because it's against their hospital policy, but their hospital policy violates the law.
And what policy do they say it's against?
I don't know, some administrative policy. I don't know. They're just the old administrative policy.
Okay, gotcha.
But their policy cannot violate the law.
Yep. Yep, one moment. And what's your name, Mr. First name,
My
Mr.
name is
Seiler?
Brad, B-R-A-D.
Okay.
There is a police officer here. I think he's Plano Police. This is 911.
Okay. We are with Plano Police. I'm going to let you talk to that officer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
So, yeah, and so he asks for the sheriff's department many times, and he talks about the Constitution and the law, and they're just kind of ignoring all of that, right? So the police came, and they did not enforce the law. They did not enforce the law. They tried to tell him what their interpretation of the law was, and blah blah blah.
Never in the history of policing has it been an officer's job to interpret the law. But these officers, they showed up and they interpreted the law for me. And they told me that they do this all the time, and that these representatives, these legislators don't know what they're doing, and that they have to tell the legislators what the law says. And he knew Matt Shaheen and he knew Bob Hall, and they didn't know what they were talking about. This is a police officer this is a sergeant, okay, supposed to know what he's doing. And he was interpreting the law, a law that he knew nothing about. He doesn't even know what an assessment is. The officer doesn't understand what an assessment is. And he was there to interpret the law for me and enforce the law that he knew nothing about.
And so he so Brad asked them to at least do a welfare check, and they weren't going to do it. They said, she's in a hospital, she's fine. And he said, I'm not fine.
I asked numerous times, and each time that she's in a hospital, there's nothing to be concerned about. I said, no, you don't understand. She's afraid.
And I was.
And finally, some officer came up from somewhere. I don't know where he was. He wasn't the one in charge. He came up and he said that he would go in and do a welfare check.
And so he did come up. He put on all of his garb. He stood at the door, and he let this guy, William Fripp, one of the abuser, into the room while he questioned me. And so William Fripp was standing on the other side of my bed as I was trying to talk to the officer. And it was hard to talk to the officer because he's overstanding. He doesn't come in. And I had one shot. So I'm telling him about all the abuse, all the neglect, all of the cruelty. And the whole time, William Fripp's on the other side of the bed from me, shaking his head, like, don't listen to her, knowing damn well that everything that I said was true.
So
everything I said was true.
Gaslighting a little bit. He was trying to,
and telling the police, like, oh, she's, like they say, they put in everybody's records, what do they call ICU psychosis or whatever. And so, he didn't come in and look at my stomach to see what I was talking about, where they were jabbing me with needles, because that's assault. He didn't. If he had even called a female officer to look, they would have seen all of the huge bruises all over my body. They would have seen it. And of course, I have a sheet and a gown now because the police are coming up to a welfare check, right? And so, the police officer I said to the police officer these words. I said, if I stay here, they're going to murder me. That's what I said. They're going to murder me.
So you had a plan, though, now that Brad was there, that you had to get out of here.
I had to.
The intention.
I was absolutely running out of energy. I was running out of strength. I was running out of hope. I was running out of time. And we knew that it was not going. I had literally, the pulmonologist was coming in and standing at the end of my bed the last couple of days saying, administration wants their bed back. And he would just stand there and stare at me. And I would say, does that mean you're going to move me to a different room out of the ICU? And he'd be like, not today, not today.
Oh,
and I have no idea what it meant, but it was very creepy. And so we were running out of time, literally running out of time. So the officer looks at me and says, oh my God, we don't have a protocol for this. And he leaves. And I'm thinking maybe he went back to talk to my husband. I learned later he didn't. And so now I'm going to take you through the next day, because I'm just going to leave this here, because the next day.
So Brad was not able to take you home. He had to leave.
He had to leave. They made him leave. And so he ended up, getting oxygen at home. The medications he needed at home. We connected with, he connected with a company called Synergy Health, which was going to serve as a home hospice kind of company.
They were going to be the home healthcare agency.
Yeah, the home healthcare agency. And so so he had all this stuff lined up, and he calls me at 7:30 in the morning, and he says, and he talked to our attorney, who was Paul Davis, and he gets this cease and desist letter written on the 14th. And it's, basically, laying out what the law is, and all of the law, what they're doing, everything that they're doing to me, and that they need to, refrain from doing it, right? That they needed to cease and desist all actions, unlawful actions, and denying visitation, and and that he was going to litigate. All right, so he gets that, right, and then he comes to the ICU, and the old security guard, who's like always on the lookout for him, isn't sitting there. There's just some young kid, and what did you do? Go ahead and tell it.
Yeah, it was the younger guy in the other picture. was standing there, and I told him, I'm here to see my wife. You can't stop me. Here is a cease and desist order from my attorney, telling you that you need to cease and desist, and I'm going to go see my wife. And he said, thank you, sir. Something about have a good day, or he didn't try to stop me. And typically, the elevators were closed. Typically, this is how much it's a God thing. When I got to the elevators, the doors were wide open. Nobody was waiting for the elevator. Nobody was on the elevator. I got on the elevator, pushed the third floor, the doors opened, and all I had to do was turn left and turn right and walk about halfway down the hallway, and I was at the ICU. When I get to the ICU, the doors that are typically closed and locked and required to be buzzed in, they were standing wide open. And as you can see from one of the other pictures, once from the doors, it's a straight shot to my wife's room. And so I walked straight into my wife's room and closed the door. And yeah, these are the double doors. And I just walked straight in and into my wife's room, and I shut the door. And when I got in there, really, it's hard to find words for the shape that my wife was in when I got there. She was abused. As a registered nurse responsible for patient care, my wife was abused, and she was abused by neglect. She was naked. Okay. No, the windows were wide open. There was no privacy curtain, nothing. And this little security guard was standing outside the door. I guess he followed me up. At my wife's behind, and she had no privacy. She was just an animal at the zoo at that point. And I was appalled. Truly, as a professional nurse, I was appalled at the state that my wife was in. I couldn't believe it. That's when I knew. That confirmed everything that I had suspected, and they abused my wife. And I immediately started telling them what I wanted done for her. They had kept me out of the hospital long enough that I was extremely upset with her state, and I couldn't believe that any nurse would sign their name to a patient in her condition. And I just immediately started telling them what I wanted done for her.
Wow. How did you get to the picture we're looking at right now? Tell us about that.
So I took that picture, and I'm going to tell you, he called me at 7:30 that morning, and he said, is anybody listening? And I said, no, nobody's in the room. And he said, I'm going to come there and take you out home hospice. If I get in the room, do you want to go? Because it doesn't pay for him to make this bold move if I'm not going to go. I said, oh, if you get in here, I'm going home with you. I'm going home with you. And I'm going to tell you, like, the night before this all happened, I was afraid. I thought that they were going to kill me that night because I had just like blabbed everything. And God sent the nicest nurse, Grace and Justice took care of me that night. And Justice was like, your feet are so dry. Do you want me to rub the lotion with the ivermectin? She rubbed it on my legs and my feet. She's like, just pretend you're at a spa. She was so nice. And then my daughter had brought these Hydra Shot drinks, which improve your oxygen. And she's like, she was reading them, and she's like, these look like they would help you. Do you want one? She gave me 2 of them that night, right? So I feel like God was like kind of like giving me a little bit of a perk up. They took very good care of me. And the morning nurse, her name was Faith. And she, and I was like, I'm going home today. And she's like, I don't think they're going to release you. But when he was in there and she came in, I was like, see, I'm going home today. Like, I knew what I was talking about. It was so easy to be cocky to Brad. this is how he got his name Huckleberry. When he walked in the door, I was like, there's my Huckleberry. I cannot describe the feeling of hope that I had when I saw that walk in the door. Now, he didn't have the gloves and the trash bag on at the time. He walked in. They were razzing him about not having enough PPE on. And so he stuffed his hands into their small gloves that they had in there. And he turns around to that linen container and grabs the bag, the plastic bag, and puts it on him like that. And he's like, problem solved. Anything else I need? And so they didn't know what to do, but he started barking out orders. They looked like Keystone Cops slamming into. They were so afraid because he was in there. And so he gets in, he tells them, where's her, clean her up. Where's her? So, and we prayed, we were praying, and
she was laying in her own
feces.
bodily fluids.
Oh my gosh.
And it was absolutely disgusting the way they treated. Now, I've seen this happen before in hospitals by practitioners that are very unprofessional. But what I saw was beyond most things that I've seen.
Wow.
And you know what? I won't play the video of the police necessarily, but because it's long. But we called 911 thinking they would help us get out. Senator Bob Hall called 911. The hospital called 911. And although the police department denies ever being there, this is what was in the hall. My daughter was in the hall and she took a video of the police officers. There were 6 police officers there.
Those are non-existent police officers standing in the hallway.
Police officers, right?
Right, imaginary, yeah.
So and there's no report of them ever being there.
And there's the others, and so Huckleberry got in. We still had to get out, and we thought that they would be there to help us. My daughter was recording. They were not there to help us. On the recording, they're discussing with their legal department and their people how to get him out of the room, how to get him out and keep me there. That was their goal while they were there. Even though the night before I told the officer I was going to be murdered, that this hurt. We were such big back the blue people, and then we weren't. And so they weren't there to help us. But they weren't going to enforce the law, and they didn't care. The reason I say this is because the hospitals have turned the police departments into their own personal Gestapo, and we hear it over and over again from other people. But we had to get through this mess. And my daughter contacted Colonel Allen West while we were walking. Senator Bob Hall called us and he said, if they ask you to leave, just do it. And Huckleberry was like, okay, I will. He was like, I will. And then when he hung up, he's like, they're going to have to tase me and drag me out of here because I'm not going. But they when this thing right here. And
he didn't have his mask on, right? We were seeing him,
right? And he was pulling it up till you better have your mask on.
That was status quo. Nobody wore a mask until they were videotaped, and then they'd slap it on.
And William Fripp was like, "You need to get out of here. You need to." And Brad told them, "I'm not going anywhere without my wife. She's not your guinea pig. You're not gonna kill my wife." He said, I'm not going anywhere without her. I'm not leaving here without her. And I said, I'm not leaving here without him either. And so we went back and forth. My daughter called Colonel Allen West and had him speak to the head of security, which is actually the chick in the high heels here that you see with the mask, and to the police officers. And he spoke to these people and told all of them that he got different treatment at that hospital and that they were discriminated against. And he told my daughter, he said, go live on Facebook now. Because she called the lawyer. She's like, you better get down here. I don't care if you're in sweats. She's like, my dad's in the room and I'm trapped in the hospital in the hallway. He's gonna she was afraid that they were gonna be arrested. And but Colonel Allen West said, go live on Facebook now because you need to get everybody you know seeing what's happening at the hospital. And so she did this little Facebook Live I'm going to play.
So I'm going to document it. Today is Wednesday, December 15th. I'm sitting at Medical City of Plano. They had officers in the hallway. They were denying Senate Bill 572. We started at about 10 o'clock this morning. It's 11:17 a.m. I just wanted to make sure I was documenting that today. I just found out about the case manager, that on top of that, a few days ago I had to fire the night nurse. My mom complained about being afraid of her night nurse. Alan West called in, and he said that he got different treatment than her, and it was discrimination. So they've already spoken to Alan West, Colonel Alan West, and Senator Bob Hall, and everybody is on our side about this. It's absolutely ridiculous. My mom is afraid. She wants to go home. They're not giving her proper treatment. It's insane. See them all? Horrible. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So I want documentation of everything.
Wow. It's insane that in an American hospital, they're saying you're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to make your own health decision. They're going to take over and decide everything for you. Oh, sorry, Gail. Sounds like there's a mute problem.
Yeah, I muted. I was double muted. And so, so it is insane. And we have about a 5-minute video clip that that we usually send out to media of them. And still, they, when we did the FOIA request, they deny ever being there. When my story was in Epic Times, Epic Times reached out to the Plano police and for a statement, and they said we were never there. And Matt McGregor called me and said, "Can I send them the video and the pictures?" I said, "Yeah." And they still stuck to their story that they were never there. And he said, "The story's not about you; it's about the hospital, but it's kind of becoming about you, right? Denying that you were ever there." Even when you can see the officers, you could identify the officers from the pictures and the videos, right? And so, and so that was our the start of our escape. And so back and forth we went, and eventually, this chick right here with the half-shaved head, she's a doctor, by the way. I couldn't believe it when I first met her. She comes in and she's got all this tribal stuff all over her. She comes in with another doctor. We call them the witch doctors because that's what they look like. And she introduces herself, and Huckleberry's like, "You're a doctor?" I'm like, "That's what I said when I met her." But she was like, she started talking to me about, she said, he can't manage your oxygen at home. If you go home, you're going to die. They started gaslighting me right away. And at this point, I'm like, if I stay here, I'm going to die. Right. So she said, he can't manage your oxygen. He piped in to say, I can manage her oxygen. And she goes, "I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her." And so I looked at my husband and I said, can you manage my oxygen at home? And he said, "I can." I said, "Do you have everything you need to take care of me?" He said, "I do." And I said to her and the other one, I said, "I trust my husband. I am going to go home with him. And, I trust my husband. If I stay here, I would rather die with my husband trying to save my life at home than be murdered at your hands." And that's That's what I told, and they tissed and tassed and huffed and puffed and said that they weren't going to sign off on me leaving, and they left. And so, so we started down the path of, we didn't want to leave AMA because then they get off the hook, right? At the time I was thinking, I'm going to sue these people. I didn't think about the Prep Act.
And we weren't leaving against medical advice. We were leaving because of medical advice.
Medical advice. Because if I stayed there, I was going to die.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Yeah, this was a battle of the right to life, really. This is a life issue.
Right. Exactly. And so he, so eventually William Fripp brought in another AMA form, and said, brought in another AMA form, and Huckleberry just rewrote it. He just started crossing stuff out, and the nurse was like, "Hey, you can't do that." And William Fripp was like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And now we know, because it was going to disappear from the record. It's never been in the record. But I signed it and he signed it. He turned it into a home hospice form. And with home hospice, they're supposed to help you with certain things. And they don't get off the hook for anything that they've done to you. And that was very important to us. And so, so as soon as they signed that form, they went completely hands off. Obviously, they took the IVs out. Or Huckleberry was like, "You want me to take them out, or are you going to take them out?" Right?
Yeah, they went so hands off that they weren't even going to discharge the IVs and everything that was on her. And I asked him, I said, "You want me to take these out, or are you going to do it?" And then he decided that he better should do it.
Because they knew
they were trying to keep them as like chains, effectively, right?
Yeah,
they wanted to keep you chained to the hospital.
Exactly. And William Fripp, he stood there at the door, tapping his watch, as Huckleberry, like, "You're on my time now," like tapping his watch, and I was in bad shape. He had to get me dressed. In hindsight, we shouldn't have even bothered with the clothes. I should have just left.
She was in a severe state of neglect. She had no strength at all. They hadn't fed her. She didn't have fluids. They weren't doing anything to help her maintain a state. They went hands off, and they neglected her to the point that what she thought she could do, she couldn't do.
I thought I was going to hop up and get in that wheelchair. I did not realize how fast you atrophy. 12 days in a bed without being, and I begged for physical therapy because I felt like my feet were turning gray and my legs were turning gray. And I thought, wow, I'm going to lose my legs. Like, I really was afraid. And they wouldn't even let me sit up on the side of the bed. I was like, "Can I just like sit up and dangle my feet? Dangle them? Can I dangle them?" No. And so they didn't take. So Huckleberry had to go find a wheelchair, and he found a therapy chair. And then he was like, we were trying to use the oxygen. He brought a little bottle of oxygen with him to switch me over. And he was like, "We got to go. We got to go." I was panicking every time he would take me off the oxygen. I was panicking because they had me on 60 liters. They had me on so much oxygen. I was addicted to oxygen.
Dependent. Your body was now dependent on this.
Very dependent. And I didn't know that oxygen was being used to kill me. I still didn't know until I got home. And so he knew, but I didn't know. And so he was like, "We got to go." And so he used the rebreather that I had on, and he hooked it up to his bottle, and he hoisted me into the therapy chair, the physical therapy chair, and he started heading out the door. And William Fripp said, "I have a shortcut." Now, he had just come up through the ER very quickly into my room, but he didn't want him going out that way. Excuse me. And he didn't want him going out that way because people would have seen the condition I was leaving the hospital.
They didn't want witnesses.
They didn't want people seeing him wheeling me out like that. And not only that, they wanted to send a message. So they took us down a long hall, these long, windy halls, to the service elevator. I'm using up oxygen because it's a little bottle, and I'm sucking it down.
So now let me tell you, the hospitals have patient elevators, okay, that patients go on that when they're in a stretcher or something like that. These are oversized elevators for patients. They put us on the freight elevator. So what they put on the freight elevator are supplies, bodies going to the morgue, not patients. They put us on a freight elevator.
Oh my gosh. Sending a message that this is what your fate is.
Yeah. This is what it is. And when
they didn't want any witnesses, if we had to stop on the way down and somebody saw the condition that she was in, they didn't want any witnesses. So they took her down the secret elevator.
Yep. And they had my daughter park the truck there, and William Fripp had said to my daughter, if your mom stays and she codes, we'll revive her once. But if she goes home, she's going to die. And my daughter was like, get behind me, Satan. And then as Brad was putting me in the truck, he said,
but real quick, they had her move the truck from the emergency room to the back of the hospital to the vendor entrance where the medical examiner comes to pick up the bodies from the morgue.
Oh,
that's actually the entrance that they brought us to. Was
so you left in the morgue.
Entrance.
They made you leave out of the morgue.
We left through the morgue. Yeah, if we would have gone down one more level, we would have seen the morgue.
And so we left there, and it really was to send us a message. And he said to Brad, he said, mark my words, she'll be dead tonight, if not by the time you get her home. And he got me in the truck, slammed the door, spun around, said, you better hope she is, because I'm going to do everything I can to save my wife. And I guarantee you, I know my wife. If she lives, she's never going to stop coming after you people. She's never going to stop talking about it. And even God's not going to be able to help you. And then he said a few choice words, MF or whatever. And he got in the truck and he drove me home. And when I got in to the truck, the first thing I literally said, this is the first time I feel like I'm going to live, like I'm not going to be killed. This was when that sun hit my face. Oh. Even before I was even in the truck, I was like, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it. And it was like, I have a chance at living. I have a miracle. A miracle has just happened. And so Huckleberry took me home, and it wasn't easy. I'm going to play. So we had to go and get some equipment, right? Because we needed a wheelchair, and we needed a potty, and we needed a bunch of stuff. And so,
and we needed prescriptions.
We needed prescriptions. We needed that budesonide.
How did you get that budesonide? How were you able to fill that?
So we were able to fill it with a
Dr. Bartlett called in. We went to a compounding pharmacy, and they filled all the prescriptions that we needed.
Yeah, he really helped us get what we needed, where we needed it, when we needed it, that type of thing. And so, and so he was a godsend. He called every single night to make sure that I was doing okay, and just kind of got, even Colonel Allen West did so, but it was hard because we needed a lot of oxygen. And so this is me the first night at home, and you can see how critical the hospital had made me.
It takes you're even though you're in such a state, you're happier to be there than you were in the hospital, even under that circumstance.
Even under that
It's the
circumstance.
first time she probably slept the
Yeah,
whole time.
because I couldn't sleep, and like I had to be aware of what they were giving me and all these things, and so I slept, and then I had to. So that first day at home, we were going through. We had 2 oxygen concentrators, because here's a wonderful thing: everybody who brought us something, they had it because they had it for somebody who didn't make it. And so this wonderful woman brought us an oxygen concentrator that went up to 15 liters, and we had an oxygen concentrator that went up to 5 liters, and then we had bottles of oxygen, and he had a regulator that went up to 15, so he could get me to
25.
25, 30
25.
liters. And so but to do that, so every time somebody would drop something off, they would say, please don't just get better and drop it, because somebody died to get you this, right? Somebody died. Please promise me you won't. And be like, yeah, I'll promise you. I mean, I'm not going to, but we needed oxygen, and he had 9 of these bottles. 9 of these bottles was all he had, not this many. And so we were going through one of these, in addition to the concentrator, one of these an hour.
The first day I had 22 total.
And so, well, my daughter,
got some from the home health company, and then
well, we had 9. We had 9 from the home health company, and then my daughter reached out to Patriot-owned businesses, and they found an oxygen company that opened up after hours and let her come and get 22 bottles. Buy 22 bottles, and then come back the next day and exchanged a bunch of them, about 19 of them, for 19 more. And so we had this and this full of oxygen. We basically turned our living room. People need to understand this. We basically turned our living room into a MASH unit.
Yes.
Right. And so because we had to, and the 72 hours of just critical care, and that was budesonide every 2 hours. Every 2 hours, I had to have 1 milligram of budesonide. The medications,
a bottle change every hour.
A bottle change every hour. On day 2, I had to get up and go to the bathroom. I could not control my urine or my feces. I could not control my bowels or my bladder. I had no control. I had thrush and this thick white gook that was in my mouth that we had to do treatments for. It was all, we had to leave my hair, we had to do something with, and I had bed sores. I had all of the injuries. And so my daughter and my husband had to work together, and my husband was the only one that was the RN. And so there was a lot of pressure, on him, and, getting that. The first thing that they did too was they refused to do a COVID test on me after I'd been in the ICU, and because they said, oh no, she did. So as soon as we got home, we did one, and it was negative. And so it was negative. And so that we had to do the COVID test to show them that, because they kept saying, oh, we won't test until 21 days or whatever. We don't test. We just assume after 21 days that you're, and then we had to deal with my hair. My hair was matted, super matted. So we had to deal with the oxygen, the hair. I had to, here's me a little bit better. You can see this is after I was this is after I got a shower, actually. But you can see the wound on my face is starting to clear up. I'm doing my own budesonide at this point, but before I wasn't.
Your skin color is coming back at that point.
Yeah, so it's coming back. I had all the blood clot that I had to deal with in my nose that were making it difficult. And we hear that so much. I mean, trigger warning, y'all. Trigger warning. I'm going to show you what that looks like because you're going to hear it from a lot of stories. That's the clots that come out of your nose. That's when people are like, you can't breathe with that in your face, and they don't do anything about it. But that happened. It took me a month to stop passing those out of my face. A month. That wasn't from COVID. That was from the treatment. Every single thing was from the treatment in and of itself. And it took me longer to recover from the abuse and neglect than it ever did to recover from COVID. And so, go ahead.
Just so people understand, COVID was an oxygen exchange issue. When your lungs fill up with fluid, like a pneumonia, you're not able to exchange CO2 for oxygen. And so it was an oxygen exchange issue. You can pump as much oxygen as you want to into a patient, but if their body's not able to exchange that oxygen for CO2, you're just blowing air, literally. And with that air, it dries the patient out. And a lot of those clots are from the abuse of the oxygen with her. They abused her with oxygen.
How long did were you at home before you started to feel you were improving? Was it just like a day or two? How long before you started to feel a little bit better?
It was 72 hours. I was up 72 hours straight for the most part. And then I think it was closer to Christmas, I think, when she actually started feeling better. And I knew she was kind of out of the woods.
Yeah, I would say it was probably Christmas. I was still on 15 liters of oxygen though.
But it was humidified oxygen on the oxygen concentrator, so it wasn't the raw oxygen anymore. It was coming through water, which was adding moisture to it.
If you were to say that the biggest difference between the hospital, what the hospital was doing and the treatment you were giving her, would you say is primarily the budesonide that they were missing, or what was the main?
Budesonide played a big role. Antibiotics played a big role. We did the full frontline doctor protocol with her, the vitamins and everything. The difference, in my opinion, is that they tried to over treat her for a condition that was easily treatable with low cost, effective medications that had a long safety record. They actually over treated her specifically with oxygen. For her, she never took anything stronger than Tylenol. They would come in with morphine or fentanyl or whatever and say, I have something for pain. She said, no, I don't want it. So the thing that saved her, she saved herself in that she stayed alert and oriented the whole time. And she knew what was going on, and I knew what was going on. And that information allowed her to make good decisions, allowed me to make good decisions. And she didn't give in to them. And their care that they tried to provide. So the most damage that they did to her was from neglect and over oxygenation.
Wow. Yeah. And so this was sometime in January that this was taken, when I was just almost off all the oxygen. I went back to work. I think it was February 1st of 2022. And so, so they tried to kill me. I take that personal. I always say that, right? It wasn't easy. Our family suffered greatly. Story for another time. Huckleberry was prosecuted, and
The police that weren't there that day, they issued a bolo on me just for a little insight. It's funny how police officers can issue a bolo on somebody when they weren't even there.
And when we realized what the police were, so the hospital, I think the hospital and the police department were so sure I was going to die that night, and that they were going to, and then Huckleberry would be, guilty of murder, that they actually made it sound like he was taking me home to kill me. He didn't, even in the medical records, he was taking me home to kill me. He wasn't taking me home and I wanted to die at home, or I wanted to be like, he's taking her home to kill her. That's literally what they said. He's taking his wife home to kill her.
I'm sure the hospital legal department and the police legal department convinced themselves that I was a future homicidal maniac.
Right. And here's the thing too. Our state rep, Matt Shaheen, filed an HHS complaint, right? He filed a complaint actually while I was still in the hospital the last couple of days, but he filed a complaint with and HHS turned it over to the hospital to investigate themselves. And they sent me a letter saying, I'm going to have to scan that letter so I can send it to people. They sent me a letter saying that they investigated and they determined that I got excellent care. And yeah, they didn't talk to us. They didn't look at any pictures. They didn't consider anything, but that I got excellent standard of care.
And I filed a complaint with the Joint Commission, and they closed the case without ever investigating it.
Yeah, without ever investigating.
And that point is that you bring up is that if you got excellent standard of care and what you received was standard of care, something's wrong with the standard of care.
I wouldn't let my dog go there. I care more about my dog than they do about human beings. So and it's a dang shame.
It was a dehumanization.
So you guys, you rescued your wife. You were able to pray with the help of God to overcome a humongous hurdle of recovering at home, all these obstacles, jumping through hoops. You finally recover. You finally get back to work after being denied all these investigations to be opened. Then what? What do you decide to do, Gail? What have you been spending your time with then?
Well, I will say, before I even went back to work, when I was still on oxygen, I started doing interviews because we needed to get our story out. But our story, even when I was still kind of in bad shape, it already had moved through the medical freedom movement because my daughter had called everybody for help. I mean, we were part of that community. And so it did, and people were calling us for help. How can I, we got a lot of calls for advocacy, like right out of the gate. Once I was out of the immediate danger, we were getting calls for advocacy, and we tried to help and hook them up with the attorney and this and that. Not one person that we tried to help lived because the family split. In every single case, the hospital will work with the weakest link, right? So we weren't able to, but there have been wins throughout the years. But so right away we said, we're going to be very active. I owed it. I promised God if I got a miracle, I would not waste it. Not even a minute. And to be honest, I wasted a lot of time. I was a gamer. I wasted a lot of time on senseless gaming. As soon as I could walk again, to my office, I deleted everything that would distract me from this mission, stopping a Holocaust. I knew, I understood 100,000,000% that they were murdering people in hospitals, even in Texas. And when people would call me, they would say, "Are you going to get the shot now that COVID almost killed you?" And I would tell every one of them, even my boss at the time, I was like, "No, Now I know 1,000,000% they're murdering people in hospitals so that everybody's scared enough to take a shot. And I was adamant about it. Never, 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 never. I was so hyped up. He would have to tell me to calm down because I was sucking up too much oxygen. Like I was still on oxygen. He'd be like, because I was like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Right. And so I started doing interviews, and we said we were going to be involved with nonprofits or start a nonprofit. We initially were going to start a nonprofit and name it after the Divine Mercy, because that
we were going to help provide equipment and things for people who wanted to take care of their family at home.
Right, because be clear, it cost us over $20,000 to save my life.
Wow.
And we thought to ourselves, what if people, we depleted everything to save my life that we had stored up. And we kept thinking, what if somebody didn't have money? What if they didn't have the money for the medications? What if they didn't have money for all this, because they overcharged for budesonide and oxygen? Like, what if they didn't have money to do it, to get all the things? Do poor people just die? And that bothered us. And so we talked about a lot of things. There's only so much we can do, because you can't practice medicine and then risk that, right? So we had to rethink advocacy and that type of thing. But finding victims. The first 2 interviews I did was His Glory TV, Crusader Radio, Protestant and Catholic. One's Protestant, one's Catholic. And we did His Glory TV first because they helped my daughter. They helped my daughter connect with people and stuff like that, and they were very nice people. And so I did those 2 interviews, and we heard from probably over 1,000 people.
Wow.
I didn't know, don't give your number out. You know what I mean? Like, don't give your number out. Because I was just like, yes, if somebody's out there that I thought maybe 1 or 2 people would call me, I didn't think I'd get 1,000 phone calls. And phone calls, people finding me on Facebook, but I was glad for it, because I was hearing from people who had been through it. And suddenly there was this vast, huge amount of people, and nobody was a survivor that contacted me at first. Nobody was a survivor. And that pained me, because people would send me, they would be like, oh, thank God they were grateful. They were glad that I lived. And they were like, do something, and they would send me pictures of their loved ones and, on the vent and all I could think of was, my God, they wanted me to go out like that. They wanted me, every time I hear a new story, they wanted me to go out like that. So we, through many, many, many iterations of working with different groups, like the 3 of us are founding members, we in April founded betrayalprojectusa.org, and we have a mission to end because it's still happening, right? 2025, it's still happening. 5 years later, we're into the 5th year, and to end the protocols, but to really to get transparency and accountability and honor the loved ones that have been lost, and heal, help the victims who are so destroyed. And so this is a lifelong mission. It didn't start with COVID. We know it didn't start with COVID. It's not going to end with COVID. There's going to be a next thing and a next thing and a next thing. And COVID was a test. America failed. We failed.
And it was all about getting jabs and arms.
Yep. And we're not going to fail
about the shot.
Right. And we're not going to fail a second time. No matter what we have to do. And, with me, I'm the president of Betrayal Project USA. Teresa, you're the vice president, and Huckleberry's the treasurer. And we've got a team of 12 incredible people that are going to do incredible things. And so people can go out on our Rumble channel and watch our town hall we just had. But here's the thing. This is what I'm so grateful for. I'm grateful for another chance. You don't get a lot of do-overs in life. My time, I thought, was ended. I didn't deserve a miracle. It was undeserving. It was a million times undeserving. I let God down even when I thought I was helping him. Even I always think I'm God's helper and I'm God's messer upper. But I thought I was listening to God all the time. Was not. I let him down more than I let him up, right? And so God gives me this miracle of a second chance, but then he does one better. So my grandkids, the little one there is 5 now. Faith is 5. Naomi's 12. Tanner's 17. This was in February. I took this in February when I was getting back to work. I look at no oxygen. No, they would have hardly remembered me. She would not have remembered me at all. And she's my little, like Nana's like the best to her, right? So she's like, I would have never known this little guy, my little Michael. This is my grandson, Michael. And he's amazing.
What would you tell people that, let's just say, the COVID's still around, but let's just say the people are getting sick. What advice do you have for them now?
Okay, number 1, be prepared, not scared. Have your ivermectin. There's a lot of places you can get it. Have ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, budesonide. Right? Have those things. Be taking vitamins ahead of time. Prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So be taking care of yourself. Have your vitamins. Do your prophylactics. I take ivermectin prophylactically. Right? I take it prophylactically. I take hydroxychloroquine prophylactically. Take it like once a week, or I take every Sunday. Laura Bartlett has some great I do not consent form.com. She has a set of forms that the Jehovah Witnesses, it's designed after how the Jehovah Witnesses did with blood, on religious exemptions and things like that. Those forms, used as she directs to use them, are a game changer. We didn't have those. Nobody had even put them out at that time. She developed those with a hospital administrator, whistleblower, and they're very good. And so have those ready. There's a lot of things that you can do to be prepared. But if you're a family member, when you have a power of attorney, don't have somebody that's going to fold. Like the reason I'm alive is threefold. Huckleberry and my daughter and myself, all 3 of us stayed on the same page, and we held strong, and we were afraid, but we went forward anyways. I had to be willing. I had to have the courage to go home and risk dying. He had to have the courage to take me home, try to save me, knowing that I might die. And my daughter also had to have the courage to help try to save me, knowing I might die in their presence. That was the scariest part about the first week at home, I would say. But we had to know. I mean, we just had to be firm in our faith. Because let me tell you something evil followed us home. Like it was there was an evil presence like we never felt before. I feel like I escaped serial killers. I really do. I feel like I escaped some kind of freaking evil that I've never faced. I felt like I faced on the devil, and it was scary. And so we all felt that. Me and Huckleberry and my daughter Angela are the only ones that will ever know the hardship of those first 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. And I'm so sorry. Really, I'm sorry for your story and so many other Americans. We believe there's 1.6 million, at least, out there in the United States, who've went through a similar story. But yours was just, nobody should have had to gone through. Nobody should have had to storm a hospital to take their wife home. That's just unheard of. And all the troubles that you guys have faced, you guys are leaders now to pass on to other folks who have to face such a thing in how to handle it, and that they're not alone, right? Any words for those people, a word of hope?
Yeah, I want to specifically to survivors who hear this. If you survived, God saved you for a reason. God saved you for a reason. He did not save you to sit on your hands. Please do not drive by these hospitals and just whistle past the graveyard. You have the ability to come out and tell your story publicly and give credibility to people like you, Teresa, and like your mom, who weren't allowed in the hospital. And they, society can just pat widows and parents and stuff on the head and say, well, that's just misplaced grief. They did all they can, blah, 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 right? Because, survivors can come out and tell you what happened on the inside. Whistleblowers can come out and tell you what happened on the inside. Whistleblowers need to get in contact with us at email@betrayalprojectusa.org so we can have you on the podcast. Survivors, put your story in and tell your story everywhere. Start with us. If you lost somebody and you're not sure, look at the hospital deadly playbook. Look at the playbook. If you recognize some of that stuff, your loved one probably didn't die of COVID. Get the hospital records, or even before. Tell your story. Your gut is right. Your gut is right, and you can connect with thousands of others who know that your gut is right. So trust your gut. Tell your story. Speak out. We have to do this.
All right. Well, again, I just wanted to thank you guys both for not only your courage and just your leadership and example of fighting a tyrannical system that we have a lot of work to do, but we're betrayalprojectusa.org. We have a lot of initiatives going. We really invite everyone who's faced something similar to come tell their story. As Gail mentioned, one of our volunteers will reach out to you. You are not alone. So again, thank you guys. Any final words?
No, thank you, Teresa, and thank you for all you do in this fight.
Thank you both for joining us today. God bless everyone.